This video was brought to you in part by SD Bullion.
While some online bullion dealers continue to charge $4 over spot for U.S. Mint Silver Eagles, SD Bullion is selling 2016 Silver Eagles for just $2.29 over spot for any quantity. Again, that's just $2.29 over spot for any quantity. If you haven't joined over 25,000 new customers by making the switch to SD Bullion, what are you waiting for? You could save hundreds or even thousands of dollars on your next order. SD Bullion, the lowest prices, period.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah Johnson with FinanceAndLiberty.com, and back with us today is Alasdair MacLeod from GoldMoney.com and FinanceAndEconomics.org. Alasdair, thank you so much for joining us today.
That's my pleasure, Elijah.
I'd like to discuss a little bit about the economy and also factors that may or may not affect the economy. I know you've discussed about how the recent Brexit vote in the UK, a lot of people were saying it would be negative to the British and European economies, but your opinion is that it really is not going to affect the British or European economies at all. Did you want to expand on that?
Yes, I just want to correct you a little bit. It's not a problem for the British economy, but it becomes a problem for the European economies. The British economy, it's actually quite amazing. Ahead of Brexit, you had the establishment trying to tell us that the world would fall down around our ears if we voted for Brexit. They really did come up with the most, if you like, inaccurate modelling of what was likely to happen post-Brexit. And what's happened as a result is that we had people putting off decisions, investment decisions, sure, until they knew the result of the referendum, and probably for about sort of 3 or 4 weeks afterwards, while things settled down, because sterling took a knock, all markets took a knock on this shock. But actually, the UK economy, I mean, we've seen figures that have come out now which confirm that everything's back to normal. We don't have a problem. But the people who do have a problem, obviously, are Europe. Because let us just assume for a moment, and I can tell you this is happening, but just assume for a moment that the UK leaves Europe and is far better off as a result of leaving the European Union. What does that do for the European Union? They then start worrying, my goodness, various other countries are going to start leaving because Britain has actually shown that you can leave and survive and prosper, if you like, without being a member of the European Union. This is something that they really did not think was possible, but it is actually happening. And already we have seen how, in the case of Ireland, I mean, Ireland does something like 80% of her trade with the UK. So she's going to be doing 80% of her trade with a non-EU member, even though she is in the EU and indeed in the Eurozone. We then have the European Commission turning around and telling the Irish and Apple that the taxation basis that's applied by the Irish government to Apple for the last, 10, 20 years, whatever the time scale is, was completely wrong. It's against EU rules, etc., etc., and therefore they've got to tax Apple 11 billion euros. I mean, this is interference in domestic tax policy, which actually should not be occurring even in the European Union. So you can see that, as far as Ireland is concerned, they are extremely upset with this ruling. And actually, I would argue that if Ireland decides it's going to stay in the European Union, then people like Apple will be looking at the UK, which incidentally will be taking a far more progressive attitude towards tax than any member country in the EU. They sort of think, well, perhaps we could relocate to the EU. I'm not saying to the UK. I'm not saying that Apple are going to do this. That would be a huge stretch of the imagination. But you can see that there are attractions for large multinational corporations to increase their investment in the UK at the expense of investment in the EU. And this is all part of the problem that suddenly countries like Ireland are beginning to face. We've also got countries like the Czech Republic, who before the Brexit vote stated that if Britain was to leave, then we would probably leave as well. So that's the Czech Republic. You've got a real discontent in Holland with a right-wing guy called Geert Wilders, who's sort of trying to get Holland out of the EU. You have got Marine Le Pen in France. You have got Beppe Grillo in Italy. I mean, there is, believe you me, there is complete discontent in the European Union amongst ordinary people with the Brussels bureaucracy. It's just not working. And the whole thing is getting worse, also not only from the economic point of view, but from the point of view of the complete failure of policy when it comes to dealing with the immigration crisis. I mean, this week alone, I think Italy has rescued something like, I don't know, is it 12,000 immigrants from last Sunday? I mean, these are people coming over from Libya. They've got there's no solution that the Italians actually have to this, and they're rather sort of hidebound by the regulations within the EU. So the whole of the EU really is entering into the next phase of a crisis. Thank goodness that Britain is getting out of it. I mean, we don't get out of it very quickly because Article 50, which triggers our leaving, is probably going to be triggered in the early months of next year. And then there is about 2 years for us to get out. I mean, quite honestly, I think we should get out as quickly as possible. And I think the timescale actually will probably run a little more quickly than anybody thinks possible now.
Do you see any possibility of them doing a second referendum vote or anything like that to try to stop Brexit from happening?
No, I don't see that at all. That's there are Remainers, if you like, who are trying to sort of push that line, but it's not going to happen. You can forget it. And incidentally, not even they won't even have a chance to vote on this in Parliament. That's going to be denied them as well.
Now, while Britain will probably benefit in some ways from Brexit, you've also talked about how it really won't change politicians in Britain. You say, quote, "No politician, unless he really understands the economic challenge, is immune from the persuasion efforts of those lobbyists and vested interests."
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, it's all very well me getting very enthusiastic about the prospects for Brexit, but the reality of the situation is that we're run by politicians who are either less incompetent, who are either less incompetent or more incompetent than the politicians in Brussels. So in other words, we've got to ensure that, having got the opportunity that Brexit gives us, we've actually got to understand what the benefits are and the best way to grasp it. If you're talking about, sort of, if you like, the normal run-of-the-mill British politician, they don't necessarily understand this at all. They're into, the state runs things. We need to tax companies. We need to do, basically, they are anti-free market. Perhaps not quite as anti-free market as the people in Brussels, but the idea that that we've sort of escaped with one bound from a terrible fate in Europe isn't necessarily the case, because we have got the potential to screw it up ourselves big time, I'm afraid.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. Click here to subscribe for free to be notified when the rest of this interview is released.